Good evening, it's Robert Sidell. I welcome you to the Dream Power Show. Not Dream Power. That's funny. That was the name of this show for a long time ago. But the Gateway Show, designed to be a gateway into new opportunities for all of us. I think we're all looking for new opportunities all the time, new beginnings, new opportunities. If that sounds good to you, today is Easter Sunday, 2023. We've just been going through a fairly long winter, actually. So we're kind of entering into a new possibility. Today here in Vegas, anyway, very spring-like weather, very comfortable, very peaceful, which is kind of a nice change of pace. So I just want you to know that I'm here with you tonight. If you like the idea of being open to a miraculous new beginning, this is the right place to be tuned into. Hey, Debbie, thanks for that. Debbie's Hall, thank you for wishing everybody a happy Easter. I am simulcasting on Facebook Live, and so if you have any friends that want to listen to this, you can always tell them where you are, where you're listening. Hey, James, how you doing? Happy Easter. And it's an exciting this life is always an exciting opportunity. In springtime, I'm looking out, today and seeing trees coming into bloom, and spring is that time where there's new beginnings, where life, in the northern hemisphere where we live, things kind of go to sleep for a while. The trees kind of just retreat, plants retreat. But we've had so much rain this winter that, you know what, there's going to be a huge influx of flowers and life of every kind. It's going to be a gift for all of us. But so whoever you are, wherever you are, happy Easter, James. And Easter is actually, it's probably my favorite day of the year. I have lots of favorite days, but it is definitely ranks at the very top because it symbolizes such an important moment in the history of humanity. It symbolizes the day that Jesus, 2 days after he was, or 3 days, I guess, actually after he was crucified and died, he was actually resurrected. And our logical brains have a hard time understanding that. I've talked to my kids about it. I think some believe that, some question it. The bottom line is, having studied it intensively over the years, I can't find any logical explanation to explain what made his disciples is, go from hiding and running away, which is clear they did, to suddenly 3 days later, suddenly becoming so galvanized and so filled with inspiration that they started standing on street corners saying, hey, he was resurrected and he was alive and he's talked to us all. And it wasn't just a temporary moment like an ecstasy or some sort of temporary hallucination. They stuck with that story, all of them, until they were killed. Only one was not killed. Every one of them the rest of them were murdered, crucified, whatever terminology. And every single one of them could have avoided that fate by just saying, I guess he really wasn't. He really wasn't resurrected. I think I was mistaken. And they could have walked away. But they instead stuck with that. Now, sometimes when I talk to some people, they say, well, you have lots of faith people believe things or even willing to die for them. That's actually true. And we see lots of stories about that. But in those cases, you have to be clear about what they're dying for. The first 12 disciples of Jesus, the people that were actually there when he was resurrected, they would know whether what they were saying was true or not. It was not an act of faith for them. In fact, they weren't even expecting it. They had run away. So they were not expecting that he'd be resurrected. And instead, they had this phenomenal supernatural experience. And that supernatural experience then affected their lives for the rest of their lives on planet Earth. And in some cases, it wasn't very long. A few of them were killed quite quickly, but others went on for decades. And none of them ever backed off of their story. And so one of my kids sometimes says, well, isn't this just like an urban myth? It's just a story. You don't really have any idea. Well, what we do know, and there's not any question about it, and I'm saying this to you because it's important to be honest about these things to ourselves. What we do know is what those disciples actually did, because there's a very clear-cut historical records of step by step by step what they did, the places they went, the letters they wrote, the churches they founded. All these things were very, very clear histories of what these men did. And I'm sure many women too, but I'm talking now about the disciples. Very, very clear what they did, all the way down to clear on how they came to their deaths. So there's no mystery. We know what happened. And the question then one has to ask is, well, if they dedicated the very rest of their lives talking about this young man they'd only known for 3 years, some cases even less than that. And they spent the rest of their life sharing a message that he lived, he died, and was resurrected to bring us a gift of salvation and freedom and love. They would not give that story up, no matter what they were put up against, even torture and death. Then in most human nature, in most, whether it's a court of law or anywhere else, it's generally accepted that if somebody is willing to risk their life for something that they know is true or false. Remember, this is not people acting from a long history of faith, but rather, because there was no history of this happening. There was no story that they were trying to fulfill. It wasn't anything that they thought was going to happen. So the question then is, why did they stick with that story that he died and was resurrected? And why were they willing to stay with that story the rest of their lives, even to the point of, in many cases, torturous death? Why would they do that? And that's when they knew what was true or false. And all I'm going to say to you, and it's worth it if you're ever talking to other people, because today in today's world, a lot of people say things like, well, really probably didn't happen, just a story. There's no good explanation that it's just a story. There's no good explanation. It defies what we know of human nature. And you just look in your own experience. Because again, those people knew it was either true or false. They knew what they saw. They knew what they didn't see. Had it just been a sort of a wish-fulfilling fantasy, and it wouldn't make sense anyway because they weren't expecting that. They had run away. They had, and who wouldn't run away in such a similar situation? Their leader had been captured and was killed. Why would they hang around? You know, the Bible's even honest in reporting that Peter even denied that he knew anything about Jesus 3 times the night that Jesus was crucified. So these things are very, very important to become aware of. Because if you can really let in the reality that this young man who really was killed and then really was resurrected, then it puts you in touch with the possibility that we live in a much more miraculous world than we normally understand. And that's why it's really, really important. If you just hear it as a story, kind of just a nice little fantasy, kind of a fun little cozy story to talk about, if you hear that, that's not going to do you any good. That defies the entire purpose of. But on the other hand, if you can see and be open to the idea that this really happened, there really was a crucifixion, a death, and then a resurrection 3 days later, and that this being, after being resurrected, communicated with his followers and lots of other people. If you can open your mind to that possibility, if that really did happen, then guess what? That could change your life for the rest of the time on earth. That could change your time here for the rest of the time you're on earth, because you're going to begin to grasp that this world's infinitely more miraculous than you could ever understand. And the second thing you could realize is that, guess what? Human beings are not just bodies. One of the things that has been taught in our society, and some people believe, lots of people don't, but some people do. A lot of people have come to believe kind of a materialistic interpretation of reality, that we're just evolved bodies and this kind of out of control material creation. There's no plan, there's no guidance, there's no nothing, which is kind of one of the things that's taught in schools. And if you believe that, then you're going to have one kind of a life. But if, on the other hand, if you grasp that you're actually a soul having a human experience, you're going to have a completely different kind of life. And what I would tell you is that even with that one story of Jesus being resurrected, even if you don't want to be a Christian, if you could grasp that, that could only happen if we're actually souls. If we're just material bodies, it couldn't have happened. And so in that one moment, that one instant in time, 2,000 years ago, roughly speaking, we got evidence, for anybody willing to look at it honestly, that you are a soul on a divine journey in a miraculous kingdom. And the idea that you're just a material being that happens to be conscious through evolution, that goes out the window. And once that goes out the window, it opens the truth up. And this is very important. What did Jesus say? The truth will free you. Only the truth. And see, that's what you and I have to begin to realize. It's the truth that frees us, not a lie. It's the truth. And the truth is, you're a spiritual being in a spiritual kingdom. And in this spiritual kingdom, we have lots and lots of choices. But one of them is, for those of you that are open to this idea, are you willing to be open to accepting the grace that Jesus offered through his lifetime? And countless people, one of my friends I just talked to today, who was raised Jewish and went through a very difficult, dark time in her life, actually decades ago, and actually she had been into drugs and all sorts of things and was ready to give up her life. And finally she just cried out to God and says, I can't do it anymore. I don't know how to make it. And I just was talking to her today, and I never give out her name without her permission, but I could tell you the story. And she said she could see a battle spiritually going on, and out of the darkness, Jesus came and saved her. And so I was talking to her about, and totally changed her life forever. And she's never been active in churches per se, but she's totally had a deep connection to Christ. So I was talking to her about it today, and I said, "Well, so that's like he was resurrected in us." She goes, "That's not a question." She goes, "He was resurrected in me, and that's why I'm alive today." And this is somebody that's happened to probably 35 years ago. And yet she's never wavered, just like those disciples, never wavered that this young Jewish carpenter, Jesus of Nazareth, came to her and saved her, even when it wasn't her faith or her tradition or her belief system. So I say these things because it's very important to understand we're dealing with a very real force. And the grace that Jesus shares is very real, very powerful, and it can change our lives forever throughout eternity. And each of us has a choice to make. Do we want to accept that gift or don't we? And that's and and I think you have to look in your own heart and soul, because you know what? I can't tell you what you can do or not do. But I realized in my life that I want that gift in my life. And beyond that, I need it. So I need it and I want it all at the same time. So this being Easter, I wanted to share this story with you, or this truth is my experience. Truth is what helps frees us in this life. And I think in our society today, that's one of the biggest problems, is that the boundaries between truth and falsity are very blurred in our society today. And if we've gotten to the point of, where if you say one thing, even if it's not true, everybody's supposed to agree to it. It doesn't matter what it is, in what part of life. And there become certain conventional truths that are suddenly being uh, proposed as being the truth, and everybody's supposed to go along and believe that, whether the evidence supports it or not, in any area of life. And I think for us as human beings, if we're going to grow on this spiritual journey, then we need to begin to willing to say, what is the truth? And how can I respond to that truth most accurately and in the best way? This is Robert Sidell. I'm going to stay on Facebook. We're going to go to a break. This is broadcasting on the number one talk station in Las Vegas. I'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hello, my friends. It's a great pleasure being with you here on this Easter. It really, really is. This life it is a truly miraculous experience. It's truly, truly miraculous. And the question for all of us is, are we going to encounter the miraculousness of life? We're raised to think it's not miraculous. The world around us would tell you it's not miraculous. The world around you would tell you that it's kind of a limited scope world. But what if you realize you're in a world that's without limitation? It's infinitely miraculous. How would your life begin to change? How would your life change, my friends? How would it change if you actually grasped that you, on the very same world that Jesus lived in, which is inherently and absolutely miraculous and absolutely divine, how could your life change? What would change in your world? What could you accomplish differently? So I just invite you tonight to look deeply at that. See, our ability to succeed in life has the ability to do with seeing what's really real for us and then acting appropriately to what is real. Isn't that really the test for all of us? For each of us. When we're presented with new information, how do we choose to respond? Where do we choose to go in our lives? And our willingness to see what is true and to utilize what's true is what's going to free us in this life. And nothing but truth will really free you. I'll give you an example, a simple, simple example, but it takes place out here in the desert. We're just at the end, getting to the end of kind of a fairly long winter. But another month or two, the snakes are going to start to wake up. And I live out in the country, so I have to be able to discern when I see a snake, if it's out in the ground, is it a rattlesnake or is it a different kind of snake? If I can discern it's a rattlesnake, I do one thing. If something else, I do something different. The point is, truth really matters. And if I see a rattlesnake, but I say, really, it's not a rattlesnake, that's really wrong. I'm just going to pretend it's something different. That could cause me a lot of problems. So truth for all of us is very, very critical. How, how well can we actually discern the truth, and then live appropriately to the truth. And this happens over and over and over in all parts of our life. I've been an attorney now for 46 years. I have to begin to discern. One, are my clients telling the truth? That's one kind of discernment. Secondarily, the truth about what our options are, what can we do legally, what choices do we have, each of these things. And if I don't do that, guess what? I'm not going to be successful. My clients won't do well. So it's very important for me to be good at discerning the truth. That's what this show is about, for you to discern the truth about you and Miraculous Kingdom. I'll be coming back on the radio. Just one second. Good evening, this is Robert Sidell. It's a great pleasure to be here on this Easter 2023. You know, it's interesting. It's good for me to have this experience because I think it's easy for all of us to get lost in the story of life. I just think it's kind of our human nature to get caught up in these stories and in the dramas of our world, and they get us off track. But if we can come back on track and say, where am I? What is this earth? Is it miraculous? Isn't there? Is there a God? What's my relationship to this God? And how can I live my life? And how should I live my life? These are some of the kinds of questions you and I can begin to do. And those are true questions. And there are true answers, at least for each of us. I can't tell you what is true for you, nor do I even really want to. But I can tell you that your life and ability to succeed depends on your ability to be honest with yourself about where you are and what's going on. For example, if you're married, the ability to be honest with yourself about, is your relationship working? Isn't it working? Is there some change that needs to be done? Hello, Janelle. Hey, nice to see you. Always nice to see everybody who shows up on Facebook. Always enjoy. And we're also simulcasting. We're simulcasting on Facebook, and we're also broadcasting on the #1 talk station in Las Vegas. And we've just had a magnificent day today. And really, all I want to do is not to add a burden to anybody's lives. That's not the purpose of this show at all. In fact, it's just the opposite, really, to release the burden. If you and I begin to realize we live in a spiritual kingdom that is inherently and infinitely miraculous, then you know what? That's going to totally change the way we live our lives. If you start to realize you've got potential within you and your life greater than anything you could ever imagine. Actually, let me put on a little bit of music here too. And I'm putting on a little bit of music. Oh, okay. Drina and Andy just returned from Easter Mass. If that music's too loud, folks, just let me know, okay? I can always turn it down a little bit. Well, okay, hold on a second here. Here we go here. Is that better or is it still too loud? You sure? Okay. If it gets too loud, let me know. So my friends, I think for all of us, the way this world's set up, it's kind of like being part of a movie. And in this movie, we get caught up in the story of the movie. I mean, it's designed that way, I think. But it's easy. But we need to come back and remember. Oops, somebody says it's still a little too loud. All right, let me try turning it down just a little bit more. Dinah, you can tell me if that sounds about right. I've turned it down quite a bit now. So the question I have for each of you is, if you're in a miraculous kingdom, and it's a spiritual kingdom, and there is a living God, whether we understand God fully or not, which I don't think any of us do, how is it going to change our life? How are we going to live differently if we believe and know we're living in a miraculous kingdom, spiritual kingdom, versus if we think we're living just in a material world where we live and die and that's just it? Can you see how different it's going to lead to our lives? And God's always giving us little lessons. I was in Costco yesterday. I know Andy always likes when I tell stories in Costco, but I saw this couple, and I don't even remember how I started talking to them. I really don't, but they were a very nice couple, and it turns out they've been married like almost 50 years. So I said, what's your secret? And this lady had a bunch of little wisdoms to share with me. It turns out she was exactly my age. But one of the little sayings she told me, she goes, remember, what you think about is what you'll talk about. Now listen to part 2. And what you talk about is what you'll bring about in your life. Interesting to think about that, isn't it? What you think about is what you'll talk about. And what you talk about is what you'll bring about in your life. So, my challenge for each of you is, if you're actually a spiritual being in a spiritual kingdom, then what she's saying makes complete sense. And then it makes it more important to be conscious of what we're communicating about. And if you're, for example, if you're in a marriage and you want to be happy, are you always complaining about your spouse, or are you trying to focus on the good in your spouse? And, we can all have our moments, don't get me wrong. We all have moments in every part of our life. But what we think about is what we talk about. And what we talk about is what we bring about. And that it only really works if you recognize we're in a spiritual kingdom. Over the years, I have watched and listened to what people say. And listen, my wife was talking to me tonight when I told her this saying, and she's bringing to my attention a couple of things that I maybe should be more careful about what I was speaking about. But so I need to be monitoring. That's why I told you I do this show every week to remind myself to stay on track. And the question is, my friends, are you saying life is wonderful and it's filled with opportunity? Like when I was talking to this lady in Costco, Dawn Smith, the 12 years, I am Jesus, a child of God. Okay, I don't know. Dawn, thank you for posting that. So I want you to think about, my friends. So this lady was saying to me, I was telling her, I said a couple things, and I think, I was just making some observations about the economy, which maybe I wasn't being totally positive or not, but and her comment was, and you know what? I think I was talking about inflation. And her comment was, and you know what? It's going to turn out just fine. And I thought, yeah, you know what? Thank you for catching me without realizing it, of maybe slipping into a little bit of a negative loop myself. So it's a constant journey for all of us. It's not that we want to be in denial. For example, there is inflation out there. You have to make whatever choices you want, but there is some degree of inflation. That's reality. What you do about it is something different. But the question is, what was good in talking with this lady yesterday, is she reminded me that yes, and it's going to turn out well. And see, the second she said that, I realized that's a choice I have to make in consciousness. Is my life going to turn out well? Is the world going to turn out well? What do I believe? If I believe we're in a miraculous kingdom and there's an infinite God and I have a relationship to this infinite God, then you know what? I have a choice I can make. And the choice is I can choose to know in the depth of my heart that good is coming. And will continue to come. No matter what I see, no matter what my eyes see or my ears hear, no matter what, I could choose to know good is coming. And there's a scripture in the Bible which I like. It's Hebrews 11, book 11, chapter, verse number 1. Chapter 11, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. And it is, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. I'll say it one more time. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. So what does that really mean if you stop and think about it? It's a two-part equation for creation, really. Faith is substance. What is substance? Substance, everything in your life. So let's say you would have an empty bank account, but you have faith that you know it will be filled, then faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. So when they have not yet come into being yet, your faith becomes the substance by which what you are having faith about will come into being. It's a very powerful equation. It's right there in the Bible. And again, it's Hebrews 11, verse 1. Chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things unseen. So let's say some part of your life. Let's say you're single and you think you'd like to be in a relationship someday. Well, first of all, I always surrender everything to the infinite power and grace of God. Hey, there's my friend Robert from Washington, D.C. Or Virginia, actually, right next to it. But so let's say that Robert and I have lots of deep spiritual conversations. And one of the principles he just reminded me of is that we need to be personally responsible. Because the last time he and I were talking about this. So we have to be personally responsible with our own choices. What are we believing? What are we knowing? What are we trusting in? And where are we going to go with it? So if you were to believe that verse that I read to you, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, then if you knew in the depth of your heart that whatever you need, whether it's economically, a new job, a new friend, a new whatever you might need, if you could rest in that calm assurance, then suddenly your faith is activating substance, which then becomes the evidence of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Very powerful formula. Now, there's another place for that powerful formula appears in the New Testament, and that's in Mark 11, 22 through 26. Chapter 11, 22 through 26. And it's one of my favorite sort of humorous stories in the Bible. Jesus sees a fig tree in the distance, and wants to get some figs off of it, but he shows up and figs are out of season. There's no figs on the tree. So he gets mad, or you can speculate in his own reasons. But he cursed the tree and says, "You're never going to bear fruit again. You don't have any fruit for me. No fruit for you." It actually says, what it says is he cursed it. That's what it actually says in the Bible. So the next day, he and his disciples are walking along, and the tree is dead. In fact, his disciples say, and this is all right in Mark 11, 22, and that whole series of verses right after that. And his disciples say to him, "Well, Jesus, look what happened to that tree you cursed yesterday. It's all withered down to the roots." That's how it's written in the New King James Version of the Bible. And so Jesus says, "You don't get it, do you? Whatever you ask for, believing it will be done," back to what it said in Hebrews 11, faith, the substance of things hoped for. "Whatever you ask for, believing it will be done, not doubting," and then he added a couple more things in, "not giving up your doubt, asking it of God, forgiving everybody you have a grudge against, and trusting that it will be done, not giving up your faith, it will be done." It's just basically anything that you could ask for could be done. So between those two different scriptures, it's a formula for living on this life. Now we're going to go to a break. This is the Gateway Show. I'm talking deeply about this today because it's Easter. It's time to think about these things more deeply for each of us. How can we take it farther? How can you have the most miraculous years of your life now and in your future? That's the purpose of the show tonight. We're going to a break. I'll be back in just a moment. This is Robert Sidell, Gateway Show. Stay with me on Facebook. So my friends, as I speak these things to you, what's neat about it for me is I always feel God's grace flowing through me, and it strengthens my heart and soul. How many times have we given up too quickly and too easily because we're being logical and rational? But what if you could really grasp that what Jesus was saying was true, and what Hebrews was saying is true, that your faith is substance. Your faith is literally substance. It can open doors. And in the Mark 11, the Gospel of Mark, verse 11, book 11, chapter 11, verse 22 through 26. And it may even go on a couple more after that. But the bottom line is right in that whole little area. That whole story is told. So what if you could grasp that that's true? How far can you take it in your life? You know, I've done an experiment in my life before. One year I focused very hard on the idea of creating prosperity. And I did an exercise with a group of people about creating prosperity. Money, to put it shortly. And you know what? I was doing this collective exercise for about 6 months, and doing a group of affirmations and writing them out. And I was thinking, what is this really going to do? But you know what? By the end of that 6 months, I made more than I'd made for years before that. Was it because I focused my mind so much? Was I doing what Jesus was talking about in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11? It's up to each one of us to try to discern these things, and I don't suppose any of us really know the answers. I'll give you an example. It's in my book, The Gateway. Let's see if I have the book sitting right here. I don't think I do. In my book, The Gateway, I tell a story, a true story actually, because it's. Okay. Bo says his mom passed away. We'll say a prayer for her in a minute, Bo. But I want you to hear this story. Actually, when we come back I'll tell you about it. So I'm going to say for Bo. Bo was saying on Facebook, his mother passed away on Saturday. He needs a big miracle fast. So I'm just going to say this. Bo, may in the name of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit and all that is good, I pray there be a blessing on your mother's soul as she moves on from this life. And then secondarily, I pray for you and your whole family to be blessed right here and now. Because she's okay, but you may be feeling anxiety and suffering and loss. So I just pray, Bo, that blessings be upon you right now, your whole family, and on your mom. And by the way, Bo, I've been told, and I believe it's true, in fact, it's happened in my life, when somebody close to us dies or makes their transition, is the word I like to use, we often get a spiritual inheritance. Some special blessing comes to us. Certainly it's happened to me in my life. So open yourself to the idea, Bo, that something special is going to come to you in your life from your mom's passing. You'll receive a spiritual gift. So just open yourself to that idea and be open to being surprised by something good. All right, coming back on my radio show. Here we go. Good evening, this is Robert Sidell. I welcome you back to the Gateway Show on every Sunday night from 6 to 7 p.m. live. It's Easter 2023. So I'm focusing especially tonight on the fact that Christ's life reveals we live in a miraculous kingdom, that we're souls, not just bodies. That makes such a huge, huge, huge difference, my friends. Oh, thanks, Bo. I'm glad you appreciate that. Yeah, I trust it. I want to share a couple different things with you here. Related to passing, somebody dying, my own mother died. She and I were very, very close spiritually. We did a lot of spiritual work together. We did all sorts of seminars and churches and all sorts of things together. So we were very, very close. So when she died, but when she died, she was also, she was like 80, almost 86, and her body was really failing her, and her mind wasn't doing much better, in all honesty. So life had stopped being a rewarding experience for her. And so I knew that it was a time of blessing for her when her life came to an end. But that doesn't mean I couldn't have felt grief or this or that. But what did happen, I'm sharing this with you just because it could be an inspiration to any of you, including you, Bo. What happened for me was when my mom passed, I felt so much love come over my soul. And it went on for about 3 days. Just tons of love poured over, like standing in a nice warm shower and just feeling this beautiful, beautiful, loving feeling. And because of that, I felt no grief at all. There was no space for grief in me. It was pure love. It's like my mom had stepped into another dimension of love and had made me this special divine gift of divine joy. And so the lesson I want to share with all of you is that in our humanness, it's normal for us to grieve somebody who's left us behind, really. It's very normal, and we may trigger anxieties and upsets and fears and all sorts of things. I'll come back, and Bo, I'll come back to you in a second and tell you a couple of different ones. But I was going to say, it's normal to feel grief. And grief is normal. It's we'll accept it. It's normal. When my dad died, though I was very complete upon his death, in other words, I had no regrets at all. We had a very full and complete relationship. I still went to a grief group at my church and enjoyed it, really, in all honesty. Faith Community Lutheran Church for almost a year. And it was a very nice group, doesn't cost anything. And I learned a lot about grieving. And for me, when my dad died, it wasn't like I said, I didn't feel cheated or anything. But I also realized, I guess I was no longer a kid anymore. I had stepped into the grown-up phase. And so I was maturing to a new level. And so it was very nice for me to go to that grief sharing group. You get to hear lots of big and small things that we sometimes deal with in grief. And so I really, and if any of you ever are going through grief, including you, Bo, contact me. You can reach me at, just look up LasVegasAttorney.com. It's all one word, LasVegasAttorney.com. Or just call me at 384-3847. It's real easy to remember, 384-3847, 702 area code. And I'll be glad to give you the number of people that are running that grief share group. They're good friends of mine. Like I said, I went there for almost a year, and it made a huge, huge difference in my life. I learned a lot about life, about relationship to God, hearing other people, how they deal with these different stories in their lives. I mean, I heard everything from suicides, sadly to say, and murders even. I've heard bad accidents, all sorts of different ways in which people died, drug overdoses. But having heard all those, seeing how the people, the survivors, handled it with their faith in God and how they grew through it. But see, it's normal. I want to say one thing. if you're going through grief and a sense of loss and sadness, and which is very normal, a grief group like that's a good place to be because it validates all those experiences. It makes you understand you're healthy, you're normal to have those emotions, and it's 100% okay. And if you feel some anger, we even talked about this in these programs, even if you have some anger towards God, that's okay too, because God wants you to communicate. God wants you to share your feelings. And out of you sharing your feelings, you will grow and become a greater soul. So wherever any of you are at in the story of life, if you feel like you've been left behind, you feel like there have been mistakes, failings, errors, which everybody has some of that. Every person alive has some of that, I believe. If you have that kind of thing, just remember, God is with you. God Emmanuel, that's a famous saying, God Emmanuel, which means God is with you always, right now. And if you can remember that, that could change your life throughout eternity. So I'm going to talk to you again. I want to give you an actual example. It's in my book. And you never know how far you can take any of these things. But it's just a true story because I knew the people involved. That's why I wrote about it in my book. There was a guy that he belonged to a club with me, a Kiwanis club, which is a service group. And his wife had heard about a competition where you would win a car if you happened to get the winner of the whole thing. It was on a radio station. And so she decided, I'm going to win this car. And so she started to practice all these kind of principles we're talking about. She was focused her mind on it. She visualized it. She believed it. She knew it. And so the very first thing she had to do is she had to call in, and how they'll do the 10th caller. If you're the 10th caller today, then you'll be in the next group of people or something like that. So she had to do that a lot of times. Eventually she became one of the next group of people. Finally, she was in a group of people where there was like 100 keys. 100 different people, contestants, had got to this category, and they put all these different keys in a glass jar. Out of the 100 keys in the glass jar, one would unlock the car. And so, and again, I know this lady, I know the guy. I've talked to her, both of them, a number of times. So she started, once she got into the category where she was going to be in that one group of people who had to pull a key out of the jar, she started going over to the car lot where the car was. And she'd ask if the salesman would let her sit in the car. And then she would open the glove box, and she'd open the trunk, and she would smell it and say, this is going to be my car. Now, she didn't say it's going to be. She goes, this is my car. And she would do this over and over and over again. And she just envisioned herself winning that. She envisioned herself sticking a key into the ignition, turning it, and it going on. So she did this over and over and over again. And she just, obsessively, what did the car smell like inside? What did it feel like? And again, this is a story I know because I've heard it directly. This is not a second or third level story. I know the people involved. So anyway, the day came when she went to the radio. Oh, Bo says, you love my book. The copy is beat up. The pages are falling out. You've had it for 12 years now. Well, come in and get another copy, Bo. I'd like to say hi to you. But so here's what happened. She gets the day that the radio competition is going to be awarded. She shows up with another 100 people, right? They're in some big room. And then that day, they draw a lottery out of a jar or whatever, a different jar, or, a basket or something. You pull a number, and the number determines what order you get to pull a key out of that jar. So first off, it's just pure luck. How are you going to get the key? That's number one. But the second thing is, what order are you going to be in terms of pulling the key out of the jar? Are you going to be second, third, or fourth? Are you going to be 50th, 60th, or 70th, or close to 100? Well, anyway, she pulled out a number out of the basket, and she was like 80 or something. In other words, there were like 79 people ahead of her, whatever that magic number was. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a lot of people, and she got at the bottom of the list. So her heart fell, and she told me the story personally. She goes, she really thinking, oh, there's no way. How am I going to win if I'm going after all these people? Somebody else will pull the key out, and they'll win. So she starts watching, and one person after another goes up, pulls a key out of the jar, goes over, tries to stick it in the car, and it won't start. Over and over and over and over and over again. After a long time, finally, it's her turn. All these people have failed in front of her. So she's going over and thinking, well, what's the chances I'm going to win? But remember, she had visualized over and over again, putting it in, turning it over, and hearing the engine start up. So she goes over to the key. Goes over to the jar, pulls the key out, not feeling very confident, but holding it in her hand. And then she walks over to the car, sticks the key in, turns it, and guess what? It was the right key, and that car started. And she won that car. And I've often thought about that story because she was so obsessive in how she handled this. And I wondered to myself, just like that prosperity experiment or project I was a part of not too long ago, where we collectively as a group wrote affirmations every day and repeated them out loud every day. That was our commitment for 6 months, related to the amount of income we were making, that kind of thing. And suddenly my income was fabulous. And when I was doing these affirmations, I didn't think anything special was going to happen. Matter of fact, that was right at the beginning of COVID, believe it or not. And COVID started right about halfway through this project. I thought, well, this isn't going to work very well. Kind of like the lady with the car. How is this going to work out during COVID? But anyway, I kept, because I promised to do it literally for 6 months. Wrote out affirmations every day, hand wrote them out like 50 times. I think it was 50 times. And then also repeated them out loud 50 times. So I had basically 50 times in writing and 50 times out loud related to a certain level of prosperity. And again, I just figured I said I would do it, I'll do it. And then we would tune in about it once a week or every couple of weeks and have people tell stories about how they're doing. And to be honest with you, in the beginning, I didn't see any real effects and I didn't have that much to share. But anyway, then one day my accountant was talking to me 2/3 of the way during that 6 months. He goes, boy, you guys are doing great this year. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, that 6 months, I earned more than 6 months than I've ever earned in my whole career. Is it because it's kind of like the story of the car? Is it just because I trained my mind and was more focused? And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? And I don't know if any of us know how far we could take any of this stuff. We really don't. And most of us, one of the people I remember, one of the motivational speakers I liked was a guy named Zig Ziglar, and he says, a lot of us are living lives of wandering generalities. We're not focused. We don't have any specific dreams. We don't have any direction we're moving. Now, there's somewhere in the middle of it all, because I want to tell you right now, I always surrender every dream and every goal to God's grace, because I don't want something that isn't in my best interest. I don't want something that's not my best interest. Even if it was that little car that woman won, it wouldn't be right for her unless it's God's will, even if she could force it. So I always give that caveat in all my prayers, that condition, only according to your will, God. But then sometimes you get to do your part too. All right, we're going to go to a break. Stay with me on Facebook. We'll be back in just a moment, and we'll keep focusing on this special Easter edition of the Gateway Show. So, each of us, it's made me wonder. I think I need to dedicate myself. It's sort of like being, what it's like? It's like being on a diet or something, or exercising. It works, but you don't do it, right? Sometimes. And how many of us should focus our mind better? What could you bring in goodness to your life by thinking it, speaking it, and receiving it in your life? Now, and so I'm thinking to myself, whatever you might be. That's one of the things when people say about my business, I always frequently say to them, I'm very fortunate, I'm very blessed, I'm very grateful. I have really nice clients, really good people, and I have good employees. I say that all the time. Now, to be completely honest with you, it feels absolutely true to me. But it's also true that as I keep saying that I'm kind of feeding that same consciousness into my life. There's an old saying that the Eastern traditions say. They say, what you meditate on is what you get. And what they'll say is, the bee meditates on nectar all day and it gets honey. And so the question for you is, what are you focusing on all day? And me too. Sometimes any of us can get caught in what Zig Ziglar used to call stinking thinking. That's funny. You've read that story, Bo. It's a true story. Maybe that's why I told it tonight, that you've read it before. We still have to, there's an old saying, when you pray, you have to also move your feet. Or in some traditions, prayer is called treatment, spiritual mind treatment. So they say treat and move your feet. In other words, you have to be willing to take action in addition to laying the foundation in your mind. So it's not just enough to wish for things or even focus your mind on things. You got to take action too. The best analogy I've ever heard, by the way, of how I think the puzzle of life works is like this. The creative process is like this. Actually, wait till I come back from a break. I'll tell you what, I want people to hear this. It's the story of a bird, a beautiful flying bird. And how does that bird fly? That's what I want to explain, because in a lot of ways, that's what you and I are. We're like birds. Actually, my friends, I want you to know it's very valuable for me to be doing this show with you tonight. I, like all of you, need to keep feeding my mind. So when I do this show, I'm feeding my mind, soul, and spirit. And you are blessing me with your grace too. All right, here we go. Back on the radio. All right, here we go. Good evening, this is Robert Sidell, and it's a great, great pleasure to be with you here on this Sunday night. This Easter 2023. My friend Bo is, and we're simulcasting on Facebook too, and he's putting some very powerful messages. He says, Henry Ford says, whether you think you can or can't, you'll be right either way. And there's so much truth to that. The human mind wants to be right. There's another way of putting that, Bo. Argue for your limitations, and you will surely be right. I'll say it one more time. Argue for your limitations, and you will surely be right. And we all have that. I mean, in other words, I can't do it. If you start telling people that all the time, and I do it sometimes too, you're going to be right. You say, hey, look, I'm right. I couldn't do it. What you don't realize is that had you been arguing for what you can do, you might have been able to do it. You see the difference? What are you arguing for? For your good or for your limitations? We have to all make those choices. Sometimes I have a great conversation with one of my kids I've been having recently. He reads a lot of news stories, so he's telling me this and this and this. And I always like to tell him, you know what? Nothing about my life has ever fulfilled any odds. If I go for the odds, who wants to go for the odds in life? You better go for beating the odds. Yeah, it's much easier to be wrong than right, Dinah is saying. But I'm going to tell you something about life, my friends. I luckily had parents that really gave me a lot of good success teachings. And they loved us very deeply. And so I had the gift of love, which I know a lot of you've had, and a lot of you given to your kids too. But secondarily, I had a lot of good success teachings. Don't give up. Don't let somebody else talk you out of your greatness. Don't let other people talk you out of your dreams. I mean, these are things we all got to believe. The world is filled with reasons why we shouldn't be able to succeed. When I showed up in Las Vegas in 1983, I didn't know one person here, not a single person. And I found I rented a room in a guy's house, a nice guy from England, who recently we've kind of connected together again after all these years. It goes back over 35 years or so ago. And actually almost 40 years ago. And it's funny? I just talked to him literally a week or two ago, and he goes, you know what you did for me? I said, what? He goes, you taught me the importance of writing out your goals. My wife and I, we write out our goals every year, and great things have happened to us. So I never knew I had that effect on him, but you know what? I'm glad I did. And maybe that's what we all have to do. See, the problem is for all of us, you may know, let's give an example. You may know exercise is important, but yeah, I know exercise is important. Yeah, I know all about it. But are you doing it? By the way, I've been doing a lot more of that myself recently and enjoying it. But I mean, I know the importance of eating right, but am I doing it? A lot of us know what we need to do, but are we doing it right? Isn't that the question? For each of us. So on this Easter Sunday, what I'd like to remind each of you is, one, I truly from my heart believe and know from confidence and inner experience that Jesus really walked on the earth. He really died. He really was resurrected. He did a great spiritual gift for anybody who chooses to accept it. And that's just a personal choice. I can't make that for anybody. What exactly does it mean? The Bible talks a lot about that. Any good church can tell you that. But I don't suppose any of us really know 100% what it means. All I know, I made a decision in my life. I accept His grace because I know I need it. I need it, and it blesses my life. It saved me many times, in many different ways. So, and I know too many other people that's true also. So many others, not too many, so many others. But so, number one, you live in a miraculous kingdom, a spiritual kingdom. Don't get stuck into the story that's just a material world. It's way beyond that. It's an inherently miraculous world. And you are a miraculous being in this world, and you make a difference to people in your world. No matter what people act like around you, you are critically important to them. And then when you're gone, you're going to leave a void that they're going to have to fill. And so make sure you stay as long as you can and make the gift you have to make. And the same with me. Let's keep making that gift, grow into the shoes that we've been given. You know, it's interesting. I started to say, I want to say that the analogy of life I've heard, the best one I've heard, is about a bird. I started to talk about it before the break. So you take a big, beautiful eagle flying through the sky. But let me tell you about an eagle. There's two wings to that eagle. One, if it only flies with one wing, guess what? It's not going to stay in the air. It'll crash. So there's two wings for all human beings too. One wing is self-effort. That's you doing the homework. That's you going to the gym. That's you feeding your mind. It's feeding your body, eating the right food as best you can, and forgiving yourself when you don't. Okay? And then picking up again. Part two is God's grace. And I don't care, you've probably met a lot of people like this. Doesn't matter how hard they work. If they don't have God's grace with them, they're not going to bear fruit. It's like you could plant seeds in a field. You can even put water down, but if there's no sun, nothing's going to grow. If there's somehow trees and everything blocking the light, it won't grow. It needs the light or the grace of the sun. Well, it's the same thing. The same thing for each of you. You may work hard, but you also need God's grace. So ask for God's blessings. The other side of it is, you may have God's grace, but don't forget, you got to do your part too. You've got to plant the seeds, you got to pull out the weeds, and you got to do your part. That's why you need both wings. That's why that big, beautiful eagle needs two wings, because it needs both things, grace and self-effort. You need both. And whenever you see somebody that's not doing well, usually one of those wings is missing. It's either grace or self-effort. They're either not doing enough work or they're not surrendering to God. So here we are at the end of our Easter 2023, just about 30 seconds more. I want you to know, God blesses me every time I do the show. I always feel a dispensation of grace. We're at the beginning of the best days of our world. I'm open. This last couple weeks, I've got a realization that I'm opening to a whole new beginning. I'm not sure exactly in what areas of my life, but it's coming, I know. And I want you each to know that there's nothing in your future that could not be better than it's ever been. That's all I really want to say. I don't know what your future holds for you, but if you dare to know with certainty and assurance, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, then you can and will walk into a fabulous future. And we can collectively do that, not only for you and I, but for our city, our nation, our world, and all over. We're out of time. I hear the music going. All of you, I want to remind you, God is real, miracles are real, and for that reason, the best is yet to come. You live in a divine world. Remember it. Go out and create miracles. It's Robert Sidell. God bless. Until next week.